What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Pondering Christianity. I am so sorry for the delay in getting you guys this episode, but holidays and school, and I have a break now, and so finally was able to put together everything that I wanted to for this particular video. For those of you who haven't seen the first video, I chose to look into cannabis as it affects the nation as it begins to move towards legalization. I just foresee this becoming more and more a topic of conversation in the Christian population, and so I wanted to cover the biblical backing for cannabis or biblical backing for usage of medicine. This video is more so evaluating some of the medical claims of is cannabis medicine, and then of course in the third video would be application within a Christian's life, and this video will touch on that some too. So those are the three parts. This is video 2 of the 3-part series. Thank you for the patience that you guys have had. I hope you had a great holiday, and without further ado, let's get into the content of the video. Everything going on, the more I've seen these conversations come up, I've seen more and more Christian apologetic channels covering the question of, like, is it okay to smoke weed? The reason I really dislike going at it with that approach is it uses these cultural, if you will, propaganda that backs up this this mentality of, like, smoking weed has a cultural association with it. There's a lot of propaganda behind that. And my issue with that is it sets up the question to immediately be, can Christians do this for the sake of doing it? It doesn't necessarily get at the root of the question. And the root of the question is cannabis usage beneficial? Whether it be smoked, whether it be eaten, whether it be vaporized, oil tincture, however you are trying to ingest it and get it into your system, is that in fact beneficial? And so the first thing I want to do for this video is state what I think medicine is meant for. Medicine, in my understanding of it, is meant for providing people a means of handling sicknesses or illnesses or even daily issues, depending on how you would qualify that. I would simply say, perhaps you're feeling a little bit nauseous. Maybe you ate something that's making you feel nauseous, or maybe you feel under the weather, you feel tired, you're having issues focusing, whatever it may be. You just don't feel like yourself. Medicine is a way of kind of helping you deal with that. It's kind of like a Band-Aid, or in some cases it's actually you might get an illness all because of something you had no control over. So it can be kind of like a Band-Aid, or it can be an actual cure for getting you past a disease or an infection or an illness entirely. So for me, when I'm looking at evaluating, can something be used as medicine, I'm looking at it from daily usage, preventative care, of can you use it day to day to prevent an illness from happening, or do you use it as more of a responsive approach, being you find out you have cancer, and so you decide to start using a medicine that's anti-cancerous. In my eyes, you have this wide range of going between those two, that anything within that area qualifies as medicine. Now, of course, there's this whole nother section of because you're not going to use a preventative medicine like you would a responsive medicine. You wouldn't drink your tea daily that you think is anti-cancerous or helps with inflammation, or maybe you're drinking some kind of like kombucha tea or something like that because you want the probiotics for your gut. You wouldn't use that medicine, right? I would qualify that as medicine. You wouldn't use that medicine the same way you would use, say, chemotherapy, right? That's an extreme form of medicine that's very dangerous if used improperly. So just because something qualifies as medicine doesn't mean that all medicines are used appropriate or properly. So the reason I state that is because I don't want you to watch this video and come to the conclusion that I am pro-cannabis and therefore I think every usage of cannabis is something that should be done. By no means. I'm simply trying to advocate for allowing usage of cannabis. I'm going to let the cat out of the bag right now. I do believe that people should have access to cannabis and be able to use it. And I'll explain why as I go through the video, why I think that should be the case. But I want this to be more a conversation of not necessarily can we smoke weed, but can Christians in good conscience good consciousness ingest cannabis? And that to me is the ultimate theological question. Is I do not agree with a lot of the scholars. Dr. Michael Brown, a guy I very much look up to. I think he does a lot of great work, but he wrote an article on how he didn't think Christians should really entertain using cannabis. He thought it was more so a movement of Christians who were just interested in getting high. And I really feel like that undermines the question that some Christians have of, can I use this as a form of medicine? So with all that being said, I want to have the conversation of, is it medicine? Because if it is medicine, then I think it becomes a whole new conversation of, what do we use it for? How do we use it? How does it incorporate into our day-to-day life? And I think that's a way more comprehensive question than simply saying, can I smoke weed? I don't think it gets at the heart of why you would want to smoke weed. And not to mention, I think that weed has just been this derogatory term attached to it. And I just want to get rid of the propaganda, and I just want to get to the real information behind cannabis. I don't want to get lost in the weeds of what the DEA and past presidents and the drug war and all these things had to do with this caricature of weed that they've created. I want to get to the facts. I want to get to what science has to say about it. I want to get to the research. I want to see if it actually works. And if it does, why can't we be using it as Christians? And how do we use it as Christians? It's kind of like you look at Paul giving advice to Timothy on how to drink wine. He doesn't tell him to go gargle bottles and bottles of wine down and become this drunkard to heal the issue. He tells him to use a little bit of wine. And so there's this nuance of how to use a medicine that prevents it from being abused. But of course, you're going to use different types. Like I said, if it's a preventative medicine, you're going to consume a lot more of it on a daily basis than you would say something that's an acute type of medicine, such as chemotherapy, which is very protected in the way that it's administered to you. So with that being said, one of the things that I've been going through here is Cannabis is Medicine by Bonnie Goldstein. The reason I chose this book was because Bonnie just released this book. This book just came out in September of this year. And I wanted the latest research. I wanted the most advanced research we have on cannabis, because we are starting to separate fact from fiction. And there's a lot of statements made by a lot of people in positions of power, DEA directors, for example, that are completely inaccurate. I mean, they've categorized cannabis as a Schedule I drug, which means it has literally no medicinal value. Or perhaps my understanding of that classification is incorrect. But from my understanding of the classification, it is that the drug has no known medicinal value, which is just proven falsehood. And that's something we can talk about another time. But right now, that's an outright lie. That's just an outright lie. And we have the research to back that up. We have the science to back that up. We have the studies to back that up. We have the doctors to back that up. And as a matter of fact, when the United States government tried to legalize cannabis to begin with, they had a lot of doctors tell them that it was medicine and that doing that would harm the population. So again, I'm so passionate about this topic because it's one of those things where we could be helping people with what I think is a God-given medicine instead of allowing these cultural objections to get in the way of the information. In apologetics, we don't like that happening on any topic of the historicity of the Bible, of philosophy, of logic, of science. We don't like these misconceptions getting in the way of the reality, because those are what create really strong atheists. And so this is a topic where I think Christianity thought leaders are getting it wrong. And I want to clarify why I think they're getting it wrong. And that's because I think that they're just allowing the cultural influences to change their perspective on it instead of giving it a clean, neutral evaluation like they should. That being said, let's get into it. So I've got a little presentation for you guys. Now, by no means is this a comprehensive overview of cannabis as medicine. Okay. This is 1,000-mile, this is a bird's eye view flyover. I just want to cover some of the basics just to show you guys that I think that there's sound research out there to back up the belief and claims that I'm making in this video. Not to mention, it's so complex of a topic. We're talking about the biological underpinnings of the human body and a very complex system of the endocannabinoid system. And I'll explain what that is here in a moment. it's a lot of information, so I just want to make it very clear to you guys that this is just a brief overview. Maybe it'll open up your eyes, perhaps some doors that you haven't considered before. If so, I'd be happy to. I really, really recommend. This book is written for people who are interested in using it as medicine, and she gives sections of the book for specific illnesses. So maybe you're suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. A lot of people are. And she has a section of the book dedicated to that specific disease and how best to use cannabis for that. Okay, let's get into it. Is cannabis medicine? So first and foremost, let's cover something called the endocannabinoid system. Okay, so the endocannabinoid system, very simply, the job of the endocannabinoid system is to regulate the flow of chemical messages that are sent between cells with the goal of maintaining homeostasis. For those of you who are not familiar with homeostasis, homeostasis is essentially the body operating the way it should. That's exactly what homeostasis is the body operating exactly the way it should. Not too much, not too little, but that perfect balance. Any irregularities experienced within our body and the endocannabinoid system goes to work to restore any irregularities experienced within our body, and the endocannabinoid system goes to work to restore homeostasis. So essentially what I'm trying to say there is anytime you're experiencing something in your body that is not the way it should be, you have this very complex, as a matter of fact, the endocannabinoid system is the largest receptor system we know of in the human body. It goes to work creating cannabinoids, right, which are found inside of the human body. It goes to work creating cannabinoids, which are designed to create this homeostasis, to keep it as simple as I possibly can. So cannabis interacts with our endocannabinoid system, and that's why I bring this up, is because first and foremost, I think the building block is, how does cannabis work as medicine? Well, it works as medicine because we have an endocannabinoid system, and it works with the endocannabinoid system to get everything back to the way it should be instead of getting out of whack. And that's why it has had such success with things like cancer, because cancer is your body overproducing a particular cell, and it becomes a cancerous cell and then takes over the rest of your body. You have cannabinoid receptors in all the following locations: brain, lungs, vascular system, muscles, gastrointestinal tract, reproductive organs, spleen, bones, skin, immune system, liver, bone marrow, and pancreas. That's all we know of so far. There may be more, but that's what we know of so far. That is a lot of the human body. I mean, that's basically, I would say, almost everything in the human body, if I'm speaking generally. And so the fact that we have cannabinoid receptors in all of these areas would tell me that if you have a keyhole and you have a key that fits that keyhole, it tells you that that might be by design. Just throwing that out there. That's just something simple. So the function of these two receptors is they interact with parts of the plant in different ways, all beneficial ways, but slightly different ways. And then there are some areas in the body that can express CB2 receptors under certain circumstances. So it seems to be kind of a fluid system, but these are the location of the receptors that are actually interacting with the endocannabinoid system to get things back to what's called homeostasis, which is getting your brain the way it should be functioning, lungs back to where they should be, so on and so forth. So again, homeostasis, endocannabinoid system is just simply working to restore harmony to the body, to get it working the way it's supposed to be working out the gate. Okay. Now, she refers to cannabis in the book as a treasure trove, specifically here. However, the cannabis plant contains a, quote, treasure trove of compounds that interact with the endocannabinoid system, helping to restore balance to the cellular messages. So all cannabis is really doing is coming in, interacting with our endocannabinoid system, and creating a message of homeostasis. So it's getting cells to communicate in a way that tells them this is how you should be creating yourselves. It's basically guiding the mechanisms that are in the cell itself to ensure that it works appropriately. Now, there are three biological active compounds comprising the cannabis plant. First and foremost is phytocannabinoids, which is just plant cannabinoids found in plant, terpenoids, and flavonoids. Okay, phytocannabinoids are unique to plants. THC appears to be the only unique cannabinoid to cannabis currently, meaning there's primarily two major cannabinoids in cannabis, which is THC and CBD. CBD is currently taken by a lot of different people, but what we're finding is that CBD regulations suck, and so you might be getting garbage that's not really CBD. And we are also finding that THC and CBD work better together. They're synergistic together. So if you isolate them out from one another, basically if you monkey with the engineering of the plant, you actually make the plant less effective. So just something to think about, and we'll kind of talk a little bit about that. Cannabinoids have been found in echinacea, sunflowers, and liverworts. So there are two majors, THC, CBD, and then there's a bunch of minors like CBGA and THCA, not THCA, but there's a bunch of different minor ones. I don't want to go into the weeds on all these because this video would be like 4 hours long, but there are minor ones, but those are the two major ones, CBD and THC. Those are the two major ones. The other minor ones, we're still learning what those do. They have effects, but we're not totally clear on the entirety of those effects. Cannabinoids are less effective when separated from one another and more synergistic when combined. This is known as the entourage effect. This is actually true for terpenoids, flavonoids, and phytocannabinoids. So all of them work together. So they all work together. So when we try to separate them out, we're really just hurting ourselves because we're just getting less effective medicine when we should just be consuming the whole thing. And then cannabis plants with a balance of CBD and THC seem to experience a best of both worlds effect by balancing one another out. So THC is what creates the intoxication effect. CBD doesn't really do that. CBD can be taken in much greater quantities as well. Now, that's not to say that CBD is the miracle. THC is also a miracle in the sense that it provides, well, you could call it a miracle, you can call it science, whatever you want to call it. I don't really care. But I would say that the effect that the THC has in terms of anti-inflammatory, mood-lifting components, these are all very, very beneficial things. And we do not want to try to separate them out from one another because CBD allows the THC high to be not as intoxicating, but it allows it to last longer time. So it's kind of like you want to experience, I'll give you an example with like a cup of coffee. You want to drink a cup of coffee and experience the benefits of caffeine, but you don't want to do it, you don't want to overboard it because then the caffeine is going to cause you to have jitters and stomach issues and just a bunch of different issues of like, man, I want the effects of caffeine, but I don't want too much caffeine, and I want the effects of caffeine to last as long as they possibly can, at least the beneficial parts of it. So that's exactly what's going on with CBD and THC. CBD is kind of helping lower the curve. So if THC is going up like this, and that's you're experiencing the psychoactive high, CBD is helping lower that so that you're experiencing a high that is not as intoxicating. So you're still very much aware of your situation and operating almost in a sober mind, but there's a slight elevation in mood, similar to the effects of what you would see somebody with caffeine may have. And that's on, depending on the dosage of THC. I mean, you can have such low doses of THC that you don't even realize it. One quick note I want to make about the endocannabinoid system. Everybody's endocannabinoid system is different, and some people are born with incorrectly working endocannabinoid systems. So there's irregularities within their systems that will cause miscommunications in their cells. That's part of why cannabis is so effective for people like that, because it's actually helping get their endocannabinoid system working the way it's supposed to, which is creating homeostasis within the body, which again, that's what we want medicine to do. We want medicine to restore us back to the original blueprint, which seems to be where we have worked the best. Okay, terpenoids. They're also known as terpenes. These are the essential oils located in plants. These oils give cannabis its odor, color, and flavor. Of the 20,000 terpenoids known, cannabis has been found to have around 200, depending on the chemivore. So chemivore, this is another really interesting concept. I want to explain this really quick. So chemivores are short for chemical varieties. And researchers have come to refer to cannabis strains as chemivores, and here's why. No two strains will ever be the same, meaning the growing conditions, the soil conditions, the water, the nutrients used, the lighting used, they all create different profiles in the cannabis itself. So, for example, if you get a Gorilla Glue strain, for example, from California, and you get a Gorilla Glue strain from New Mexico, those two strains are going to be vastly different from one another because of the growing conditions that they were raised in. As a matter of fact, you might not even be able to both, they might not be able to both be classified as Gorilla Glue because that's how much of a variation there can be in their chemical profiles. And that's what you want to know. You want to know what's in their chemical profile because that's what's going to be interacting with your body. Terpenoids found in chemical varieties of cannabis are limonene. Limonene is a terpenoid also found in things like lemons, citrusy fruit. Then you have caryophyllene. Caryophyllene. Sorry, I butchered that. Alpha-pinene, linalool, and myrcene. So these are all terpenoids that you find not only in cannabis, but you find these essential oils in a lot of different plants. In the book, she builds out lists of where you can also find these other terpenoids, other plants, other fruits, other vegetables, so that you can see that there are properties within the cannabis plant that match up to things that we have in our everyday diet. These combinations, along with THC and CBD ratios, determine the plant's ultimate efficacy when treating varying issues. So that's why it's so important to know what's in it, because certain chemical variations are going to work better than others for certain things, such as one chemivore would work really well for PTSD, while another chemivore would work exceptionally well for something like schizophrenia or fibromyalgia or whatever, a traumatic brain injury. They have different properties that they're better at handling based on what's in them. And that's why it's so important for us to know what we're consuming and for us to know what's in the plant specifically, because that variation can be great. And the efficacy of the plant can also be very, very great depending on that combination. The final component is flavonoids. Flavonoids are compounds that give plants their pigmentation, filter ultraviolet rays, attract pollinators, and prevent plant disease. Flavonoids have been shown in laboratory studies to have anti-inflammatory and antioxidant properties. They also have antifungal, antibacterial, antiviral, anti-cancer, anti-allergic activity. Flavonoids are reported to be synergistic with both phytocannabinoids and terpenes, enhancing and modulating the medicinal effects. The three flavonoids you would find, it's actually technically four, found in cannabis are quercetin, apigenin, cannaflavins A and B, and then the cannaflavins A and B are unique to cannabis plants. So again, those are the three major active properties in the cannabis plant. The biological active properties, these are the properties that are interacting with your body, and these are the things you want to know about. So again, these all have been found to have anti bad things, to summarize that. And so those are the three categories you want to be aware of. Cannabis has been successfully linked in treatment of the following: anxiety and depression, appetite stimulation, arthritis, asthma, attention deficit hyperactive disorder, autism spectrum disorder, autoimmune and inflammatory conditions, cancer, chronic pain and neuropathy, diabetes, epilepsy, fibromyalgia, gastrointestinal disorders, glaucoma, infectious diseases, liver disease and hepatitis C, migraine headaches, multiple sclerosis, neurodegenerative disorders, post-traumatic stress disorder, schizophrenia, skin disorder, sleep disorder, spinal cord injury, Tourette syndrome, and traumatic brain injury. That's just of what we know so far. That's just of what we know. And things like anxiety and depression, appetite stimulation, arthritis, asthma, chronic pain, diabetes, skin disorders, post-traumatic stress disorder. Those are some of the ones that come to mind when I think of things that people struggle with every single day. Some of these come and go. Some of these are there all the time. So I think it's very important for us to pay attention to the potential of using this particular plant as a preventative and as a reactive medicine, and I think it's very much here in the book, and she links every single study, every single research. You want to go check it out and follow the rabbit hole. By all means, highly recommend it. It's all there. Okay, now here's the other interesting part, is this catch-22 seems to be with these medicines, is that when we get a medicine, we have cons, right? You have your pros and your cons of using a medicine. But ultimately, what you're looking to is you're looking to see if the pros outweigh the cons. Now, what's fascinating about cannabis is that I think there's an astounding list of pros and a very, very small list of cons. My main point of the con would be you can't overdose on it. And I would say that's a pro. Now, most people think you can overdose on it. Now, for me, I would say fatal overdose is what you're looking at. You can overdose on anything, but a fatal overdose is what I want to talk about. Fatal overdose is impossible with cannabis. There is no danger of respiratory arrest or death. That's because it doesn't interact with your heart or any core functions of your brain that affect your living operations within your brain. So you can take as much of it as you want. Now, I don't recommend doing that, but if you do that, if you do accidentally overdose, I'd rather say it in this situation, if you do accidentally overdose, the cons are you might experience some discomfort in a few different areas, which I'll name, but ultimately you're not going to jeopardize your overall well-being. And I think that that's very, very key and very important for any kind of medicine, because that tells me that we can allow everyone to have an opportunity to try it without fear of it killing someone. Overdosing of THC can result in nausea, diarrhea, rapid heart rate, altered time perception, paranoia, anxiety, impaired motor coordination, delusional thinking, excessive sleepiness, and or sense of impending death or perceived harm. Please note that simply time passing will remove any of these conditions. So that's generally the experience when I've talked to people about their experience first time with cannabis. They discuss, people who didn't like it discuss conditions like this. And this is just a result of you having too much THC in your first trip, in your first usage of cannabis, right? You just had too much. And so if you had known what was a good starting point, you could have worked your way up into where the beneficial properties were, instead of getting too much right away and then having a panic attack. And then there is an element of when you are having a panic attack, you're inducing that onto yourself and causing other conditions that aren't actually coming from the plant. They're coming from you having a panic attack. So that's important to note, that people who have this general sense of loss of control over themselves, over what they're doing, that typically is what's going to result in the panic attack. That's why the psychoactive component of THC is so it's scary. But there's a lot of medicinal properties within the THC itself, mainly anti-inflammatory. The high itself can be medicinal in the sense that it allows you to lower levels of anxiety, lower levels of depression. Those things are essential. Okay. CBD overdosing may include diarrhea, drowsiness, sedation, reduced appetite. Again, be mindful of drug-to-drug interactions. There are some currently known when possible use cannabis alone, not under the effects of other drugs. This is essentially. So my advice to you is, if you are interested in using cannabis and you do take other drugs currently, try to avoid taking those other drugs and taking cannabis. If you're going to do one, do it in isolation so that you can see where those beneficial properties may lie. And again, I'm going to just advise everyone here that if you have a doctor, seek to the doctor's advice. But I do believe in people's autonomy. So if you don't like what your doctor's saying, do some research yourself, find another medical professional, seek counsel from them. Again, I'm bringing all this up from a theological apologetic perspective of, I'm looking at what does the research and science have to say about cannabis as being a medicine? What are the cons of it? And then how do we weigh that out in terms of being good Christians, right? Following a Christ-like example in the usage of the things that we're doing. So, and then finally, my tip to you guys is, if you do go to a dispensary, you can look for something called a certificate of analysis to determine what's in the plant. That's basically a laboratory analysis of all of the chemicals in the plant, so that you can see a full profile of all the things that are in there, so you can know exactly what you're consuming, because not all cannabis is grown the way it should be grown. Sometimes the growers are putting things into the grow process that should not be there. And that's kind of the same thing you would see if you went to the grocery store and you're looking for an organic apple versus apples that had pesticide sprayed on them, because you want to eat an apple. You don't want to eat an apple and pesticide. So it's kind of the same thing with cannabis. Make sure that you are aware of whatever's involved in the plant. Okay, so that is just a flyby view of cannabis as a plant. I don't want to make this video too long, and I know it's already going pretty long. So here's the thing. From everything I've seen so far, that Cannabis as Medicine is the most comprehensive resource I've found in regards to cannabis. And that's because more and more research is coming out on the plant. And so the most recent stuff we're getting is much more accurate than things that we had, say, even 10, 15 years ago. With all this information coming out, we can now evaluate cannabis from a neutral perspective. We can come at it and we say, okay, yes, I want to operate with a sober mind, but I also understand that there are greater goods to be accomplished, right? So, for example, what I mean by that is if someone's in pain from, say, a surgery and it's overwhelming pain, I wouldn't say that they're operating from a sober mind. They're operating from a place of pain. They're operating from a place of anxiety, of depression because of this pain. And so what we want to do, that's why we want to provide medicine, is we're trying to heal this person and get them back to, if you would, a soul's state of homeostasis. We want to get that soul back to a place where it can make decisions appropriately. Because we all know it's extremely difficult to make decisions when you're under distress, and it could be psychological distress, it could be physical distress, emotional distress. And so that's what's so fascinating about cannabis is it's not only is it providing relief on the physical level, it's providing relief on the psychological level. And so I think it's important. It's just like, and if someone's just kind of like, you don't want cannabis to have the high, I would be curious to ask this person the question of, do you think that it's okay for someone who suffers from anxiety or depression to take mood-enhancing pills because their brain's physiology is off, and so it's producing chemicals that create depression, and therefore they need some kind of physical stimulation or physical medicine to help create that homeostasis back in the brain? I think most Christians would agree that that is what you want. You want to provide this person medicine. If they're suffering from suicidal thoughts, we want to help them. We want to help that person's brain like we would want to help someone who broke their leg. We would want to help repair the leg, heal the leg, and do what we need, whether it be dietary assists or medical assists for this person to get that leg healed up the way it needs to be. And there's a lot of properties that we know of about the leg. For example, they could have a blood infection of some kind that may have nothing to do with the actual bone structure of the leg, but they would take medicine for that. So all this just to simply make the point that human beings are complicated creatures. There are physiological issues, there are mental issues, there are emotional issues, and if we can help heal those things, we should look to do that. Now, do all things in good consciousness, as Paul instructs us to, right? These in his epistles, he constantly talks about doing things within good conscience. Your conscience is a gift given to you by God to let you know when something's right and when something's wrong. Now, if you feel like you're violating your relationship with God, then don't do it. But be mindful not to tell other Christians who don't feel like they're causing that to be the case, to not necessarily have that issue for them, right? Like, yes, you want to be helpful in the way that you're helping other Christians understand the Bible, but you want to be careful so as to not, for example, it's like drinking, right? Like some Christians think it's a-okay to drink and have wine and et cetera, but none of us want to be drunkards. But there's a threshold between having a drink and becoming drunk. There is a threshold there. And so I think it's the same situation with cannabis. There's a threshold of being super high and irresponsible, and then there is using cannabis to assist in medicinal properties. And so I think that in good conscience, I can highly recommend Christians use cannabis for medicinal reasons, but use it with a level of responsibility. And like I said, if it causes you to have issues with your relationship with God, then don't use it. But don't take your understanding of how your relationship with God is and then try to press that into someone else's life and say, well, you shouldn't be using cannabis because you're only using it to get high. I don't think that that's the appropriate thing to do in those situations. So it's difficult for us to know what other Christians are using cannabis for. They might have one of those many, many issues I listed. I would say that a majority of the population is affected by one of those. And so that's why I think it's so important for us to be understanding that some people want to use cannabis, but if you can't use it, again, if you can't use it in good conscience, then just don't do it. But at the same time, understand that it is medicine, and it can be used as in a reactive medicine, or it can be used as a preventative medicine. And so if someone's using it within those disciplines, I think we should be supportive of that. Now, if we see it causing them to stumble, if we see it becoming an issue, an obstacle between them and the gospel, or them and their relationship with God, that's when we want to intervene, and that's when we want to provide feedback for that person that they've gone too far. But it's balance in all things. So ultimately, I hope you guys found this week's video to be beneficial. I know it was a lot of information, but I really hope you guys found this to be uplifting. And I think that there's a lot there. I really do think cannabis is a God-given plant. And I think that the more we let misinformation float around about it, the more we're hurting people who could be using cannabis instead of some other really dramatic pharmaceutical drug that is synthesized in a lab, and not all of us feel super good about that. I know I don't. I would much rather go out to my garden to get medicine than I would want to walk into a laboratory and get something synthesized by human beings. And that's my personal perspective. But I do know a lot of Christians feel that same way. I just want to get this information out there because I think that there are people who would benefit from it, and it's worthwhile. It's worth ruffling some feathers over. So if you guys found this video beneficial, give it a like, comment what you guys thought below. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Let me know, and let me know why. In the meantime, keep on pondering.